So after jumping down a series of holes, remember all the holes? Silent Hill is just full of just holes, jumping down the holes, right? After jumping down a series of holes inside of the Silent Hill Historical Society, James is about to confront a very dark and dangerous side of himself at the very depths of his being. So it's very symbolic that he descends this hole into this hole, right? Because what he sees down there is pretty fucking frightening. Eddie. He sees Eddie. He sees a side of Eddie that's like, whoa, oh shit, right? James is seeing a new and disturbing side of Eddie now. James is getting a glimpse of exactly what it looks like when care for self and other goes completely out of the window. Remember that scene with Eddie? Killing a person ain't no big deal. I mean, he's completely lost it. Scary, scary stuff. Unlike Pyramid Head, Eddie puts a more relatable and human face onto the darkness that James must face. So in a way, in a very big way, Eddie is helping James, right? He's assisting the hero. James is beginning to see that anyone can become a monster, right? Including Eddie, including himself. So Eddie, he's seen here saying, till now I always let people walk all over me. Until now. So this self-loathing is starting to turn outward. He turned it in upon himself for a long time, and now he's turning it outward in a big way against people, right? So after Eddie leaves the cafeteria, James finds the tablet of Gluttonous Pig. This is one of the 3 tablets needed to solve the Toluca Prison gallows puzzle. The tablet represents Eddie Dombrowski, of course, right? What is most interesting here is not the association with Eddie, but that this tablet is modeled after the Aztec god, I'm going to do my best here, Tlahuizcalpan-Tectli. This means the Dawn Lord, or Lord of the Dawn, right? It's 2 words meaning Lord of the Dawn, which to the Aztecs was the personification of the planet Venus. According to the Aztecs, the planet Venus was a war god, known for its violence and believed to strike people down with darts, right? It's interesting that Team Silent decided to put so much Mesoamerican, Aztec, Mayan, pre-Columbian sort of imagery and references into Silent Hill. We're gonna go down a little side street here and talk about the history of Venus, Aphrodite, and why she used to be associated with war. It's a fascinating story. It's interesting. So far ancient peoples of the world, 3,000 years ago plus, that's what I would consider far ancient, is over 3,000 years ago. They had a fearful and suspicious relationship with the planet Venus. Echoes of this mistrust and foreboding is present in ancient civilizations throughout the world. It's found in hymns from Sumeria. It's also found, of course, in the architecture and symbols of Mesoamerica, South and Central America, the Aztecs and Mayans. In modern antiquity, or to say in the previous 3,000 years to present day, such as the Greeks and the subsequent Western cultures that came out of the Grecian influence, Venus is likened to the goddess Aphrodite, the goddess of love and pleasure, right? Why has the perception of the planet Venus changed so radically since far ancient times? Did something happen to the people of far ancient civilizations around the world that would cause them to see Venus as a goddess of war? This seal in the upper left is from the Akkadian Empire. This is dated approximately 2150 BC, right? So more than 4,000 years ago. This depicts Ishtar, or Inanna, which is the old name for Ishtar, known as the Queen of Heaven in the sky. She's shown here equipped with weapons on her back, wearing a horned helmet and trampling a lion. Ishtar is the planet Venus, okay? These gods, by the way, like Aphrodite and Zeus and all these different gods, they came from a time when the ancients, the mystics, the wisdom keepers would look at the sky and carefully observe, and they would make up these stories that correlated to the movements and the behavior of the celestial bodies, right? So, and by the way, the Akkadian Empire was approximately in the Middle East, like in between Syria and Persia, between that area. So Inanna, or Ishtar, as subsequent cultures named her, appears in more myths than any other Sumerian deity. Many of these myths involve her taking over the domains of other deities. In far ancient times, she was the goddess of war, justice, and political power, and there's a very interesting reason why. It was only after many centuries, and by the way, these gods move from east to west. So it was the Persians and the Egyptians that primarily taught and influenced the Greeks, for example, right? They didn't come up with this stuff by themselves, but neither did the Persians or the Egyptians. So it was only after many centuries, as the numerous cults of Inanna passed through the ages between neighboring cultures, that by the time she reached Greece in modern antiquity, her image began to soften, and there was no longer any association made with the goddess Aphrodite, aka the planet Venus, and war. They all had the same gods because they all had the same sky over their heads. How would different cultures adopt the same deities in the first place? Essentially, these stories, these teachings or these myths started with deities in the sky, and of course cultures interact with each other, conquer each other, and they share these stories, or they impose these beliefs upon each other, right? And they're all under the same sky, so they have different names for the same gods. This thing that rises in the east in the early morning, what do you call it? Well, we call it this. Well, I call it that. It's the same god, right? So how and why did this warrior goddess of destruction, this Inanna, evolve into the sensual, nurturing feminine image we're familiar with today, right? How did it turn into Aphrodite, this goddess of love, right? Strange. Well, here you go. Here's a very compelling reason why, or theory why. So this is Immanuel Velikovsky. He wrote the book Worlds in Collision. It was published in 1950. He was strictly, in his profession, he was a physicist. And then he went on to study, his father was a rabbi, and he went on to study ancient civilizations, their stories, and biblical scriptures. He got really wound up in this and really interested. And he concluded some rather interesting things about the planet Venus. He wrote about Venus being rather comet-like and a new arrival in our solar system, passing very close to Earth and Mars about 3,400 years ago, which caused devastating catastrophes upon the planet Earth, right? Including massive earthquakes, floods, major disturbances in the Earth's electromagnetic field, including incredibly violent lightning storms. I mean, floods, all kinds of shit happening, right? Great cataclysms on the Earth at that time. And this is in the far ancient world. So remember the Venusian Aztec god that shot darts at everyone, right? Well, while Velikovsky was largely rejected by mainstream science, many of his wild predictions made about our solar system were scientifically proven years later. Discovered only in 2002, this ancient Mayan structure, for example, was built as an observatory for the planet Venus, the sun, and the moon. Far ancient peoples experienced such devastating earth cataclysms that they built observatories and temples in an attempt to survive any future disturbances, or by trying to appease and predict the actions of the planetary bodies in the heavens. So this is interesting because this tablet, the tablet of Gluttonous Pig, and its association with Eti, its association with the Aztec god of Venus that's causing all this destruction. Well, that's Eti causing all of this destruction, right? Pretty interesting. I just want to touch on this because this is just so fascinating. So Venus, a new arrival to our solar system. Velikovsky made all of these predictions before, this is in 1950 in his book. He wrote this book in the 40s. He made all these predictions about Venus that later on NASA was able to prove were actually factual. And he did this all through scripture. It's crazy. I know, right? So these are facts about Venus. Venus rotates opposite from the sun and all the other planets. It's the only planet to do this. Nobody knows why, right? And its rotation is slowing every year, and it'll eventually start to turn the other way. Right? Venus has the remnants of a comet-like tail, which indicates that it traveled at some point. It's the only planet with no natural moons or satellites. It's the hottest planet in the solar system. It has a very weak magnetic field. This baffles scientists and lends to the theory that it may not have a solid core at all, like the rest of the inner rock planets do. It orbits the sun in a circle, not an ellipse. And it's just too weird. I mean, Venus is just too weird. And most interestingly, Venus makes the perfect pattern of a pentagram every 8 years as observed from the planet Earth. Observatories of Venus built by the ancient Mayans have shown that this pattern was recognized and known about for thousands of years. And there's the pattern just to the lower right of Venus. You can see that pattern of the pentagram, right? So let's move on to the next tablet. Nearby in one of the shower stalls, James finds the tablet of the Seductress. According to Konami, this tablet represents Angela Orosco. This tablet depicts the plant goddess Maya Huel, whom is the spiritual essence and personification of the mogwai plant. This mogwai plant, otherwise known as the agave plant, was used to make pulque, which was an intoxicant. The goddess here is depicted holding a knife and crouched on top of several animals. In one of the prison cells, James finds the tablet of the Oppressor. And this tablet represents James himself and is used to atone for his sin of murder, or his presumed sin of murder, right? While James did not actually commit murder, his unconscious mind is presenting this tablet as a way for him to take action in order to reconcile his guilt over Mary's death. This tablet's really interesting because the tablet of the Oppressor depicts two figures, right? First, it depicts the god Tlazolteotl on the left, and she is the goddess of sin. She's the patroness of the adulterers, right? This clearly represents Maria. The figure on the right of this tablet is not a god, but it is James himself. So more accurately, the figure on the right depicts the shadow aspect of James, which is none other than Pyramid Head. Okay? So given the ceremonial associations with the Aztecs, there's no doubt that each of the four characters associated with these tablets needs to be sacrificed in order for James to reconcile the discord within himself, right? All four of these characters need to be sacrificed, including the shadow self of James. James needs to reject, destroy this version of this shadow self, this pyramid head, right? Of course, in order to do that, James must accept. He must first accept and integrate that shadow self within himself, and then, only then, right, can he make that spiritual sacrifice, or that he can only, because right now, remember, Pyramid Head's some monster outside of James. He has to accept it within himself, accept that that's a part of himself, and then rise above it, right, so that it doesn't control him. But he has to sacrifice that side. He has to kill Pyramid Head symbolically. So the collection of these 3 tablets of atonement are required in order to complete the prison gallows puzzle. After he places the tablets, a scream is heard after solving the puzzle, which indicates a sacrifice or side of James which is about to die. James turns around to leave the gallows chamber and finds the horseshoe, which, combined with the wax doll and lighter, allows him to descend even deeper. So let's talk about the difference between atonement and sacrifice, because this is a very important distinction. And then we can talk a little bit about how they're related and what it means for James in Silent Hill 2. So what exactly are atonement and sacrifice? And where do these ideas begin? And how have these ideas changed over the course of human history? Atonement, or at-one-ment, means reconciliation. It means to bring together again, right? So something that's fractured, something that's broken, right? Atonement is required if a sin has occurred, which is to say, a covenant or trust has been broken in some way, either with oneself, with another, with God, or with all 3. So sins are felt in the human body and are pre-religious. You know when you've done something wrong. You know when you've wronged yourself or you've wronged someone else, so long as you have a conscience, so long as you have an emotional center, right? If you're a sociopath or a psychopath, well, you don't care. But for the rest of us, for most of us, you know, you can feel when you have broken a trust or broken a covenant with yourself or with someone else. Sin against another person also fragments the self. So when you sin against another or you harm another, you also harm yourself. Because this creates inner fragmentation and subsequent conflict, right? Because if James is harming another, or he has guilt that he's responsible for Mary's death, right? He has to reconcile that within himself. There's some atonement he has to do. He has to take the broken parts and go through this tablet ceremony and all these different ceremonies in the game. All these puzzles, by the way, are just ceremonies of atonement. His unconscious psyche is trying to have him go through the actions of putting things back together so he can start to reconcile, move on, right? So, in the sense of our cultural understanding, this means if we sin, our atonement is the act of bringing together that which we have broken. Atonement is, again, at-one-ment, to make one again, to bring together. So ceremonially, it could be seen as assembling or joining the broken things together, whether physical or metaphysical. The solving of a puzzle in Silent Hill 2 signifies the atonement, bringing together the pieces, right, to solve the puzzle or to resolve, right? So this is another way of saying he's creating order out of chaos. This chaos is all these pieces. Where do these go? What do these mean? Putting them together is bringing order in the self, bringing the broken pieces of the self, bringing them into alignment in some way. In other words, solving a puzzle means making sense out of nonsense. So atonement itself has several different levels depending on the sin. In many cultures, heinous crimes such as murder can be only atoned for by death. You have to, the committer of the murder has to die. This is blood atonement. All levels of atonement are entirely different than the concept of sacrifice. although they can and are often loosely associated with each other. So that's atonement, to make one again. Let's talk about sacrifice and what it means in Silent Hill 2. Sacrifice is offering something of value in exchange for something else, right? That something else is presumably of greater value, although that may not always be the case, because sacrifice does involve some sort of risk. The peoples of Mesoamerica, so the Aztecs and the Mayans, must have believed they were offering something of value to appease the wrath of the planet Venus, for example. If you see up on the left here, this stone altar was used for sacrificing, right? They would sacrifice humans. They would sacrifice, I'm not sure if this was used probably for human sacrifice. As you can see, there's all these little human shapes, characters here, all the way around, right? So this is used for human sacrifice. So had they not believed that what they were offering to the gods had any value, the sacrifice would be meaningless, right? Because sacrifice doesn't mean killing. It means giving up something in order to receive something. But that something you give up has to have value, right? Hence the supposed offering of virgins on the sacrificial altar. This Aztec altar seen above may have been used for both sacrifice and blood atonement, although sacrificing one whom has sinned would not have been considered a worthy offering to the gods, right? Because someone who has sinned, yeah, they just have to atone for their sins, right? You can't sacrifice them because they don't have any value. So you have to have a worthy offering to the gods. So this distinction must have been realized if they believe the gods, of course, to be omniscient, and right, and of course they probably did. This is where things get weird, because Jesus offered himself as a sacrifice to atone for all of the sins of mankind, right? This atonement travels simultaneously backward and forward in time. This idea of self-sacrifice seems straightforward enough, but how could Jesus atone for the sins of others, including the unborn, if we are also supposed to be responsible for our own actions and judged accordingly by God, by our own deeds, right? Something fishy here. So the trick of the church is that if it is true, you can be forgiven for your sins by accepting Christ as a deity and not merely an enlightened man who realized his higher self and true nature as God essence, like Jesus did, then you must believe you are distinctly separate from God, which is to say, you are not of God essence, hence eternally unworthy. This is the greatest lie of Christianity, right? I saw a sign in a church the other day that said, I'm not a churchgoer, but I saw a sign in the church, on a church the other day. It said, Jesus was a man, not a religion. That pretty much nails it. There's a lot of religious themes in Silent Hill. So to understand the difference between atonement and sacrifice is very important, especially for Silent Hill 3, right? Silent Hill 4 as well. So after opening the hatch using the horseshoe and wax doll, Harry must go even further into the unknown.